Hey friends, welcome back to the Daily Dose. We're kicking off another week. We're looking at day number 57 today, so we're still cruising right on through the book of Deuteronomy, and we've had quite a few supplemental videos from our friends at the Bible Project. We've got another one down below today, so go check that out. Down in the video description, you will see a link for that video. You will also see a link where you can click to get the downloadable PDF version of the Bible reading plan that we're going through, so that if you don't have one, you can follow along and keep up with us. So again, we're looking at day number 57 today. That means that we are going to be reading Deuteronomy 13 and 14 and Psalm 57. For anybody that's new to the Daily Dose, I just wanted to recap real quick. This Bible reading plan that we do, it goes through the Bible for the most part in chronological order from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, right? It starts at Genesis, works its way through the Old Testament, into the New Testament, all the way through to Revelation. But the way that they've got it set up with the Psalms is that in addition to the regular, more chronological reading that we have each day, they also throw one psalm into the mix, just so we can kind of stay up with that poetic literature. And there's so many things in Psalms that can be encouraging and can be uplifting. So I understand why the folks that designed this program did that. I think it's a pretty good idea. So don't be confused if you see that we're reading out of Deuteronomy and then all of a sudden there's a psalm thrown in there. That was by design. Now, the psalm does not necessarily correlate directly to the other scripture that we're reading. So don't get confused and think that. You'll be like, how does this psalm relate to what we were reading about in Deuteronomy? Well, it may not, but you know what? One thing that all scripture relates to is Jesus and what he did for us, right? So let's keep that in mind as we go on through our text for today. So, as is my custom, I'm going to give you guys a brief summary of the chronological portion of the text today, which for us is Deuteronomy. So we'll go ahead and just jump right in and look at a few things from Deuteronomy 13 and 14. And then after that, I will go over what I like to call my point or points of interest, which are just any specific passages in our daily Bible reading that speak to me or just kind of make me think more so than any of the others. So what we're looking at today, going into Deuteronomy 13, we start off looking at the worshiping of other gods. Gods with a lowercase g, right? Because there's only one real God, and that is the God that we serve, right? Yahweh, Jehovah Jireh, the one and only Lord. But back then, and I'm sure in some areas still today, there are people that worship all kinds of other gods and goddesses of nature and fertility and mythology and things of that nature. So this land that the Israelites were going into to take, that God was giving them, it was inhabited by the Canaanites and by quite a few different groups, tribes of people that were into these kind of pagan idolatry worship systems of false gods. So in regards to instruction about or warnings against worshiping other gods, we are warned, or the Israelites rather are warned in this scripture about a prophet. If someone comes along and claims to be a prophet and they claim that they are speaking on behalf of God, that's what a prophet was, right? A prophet was someone who would speak the words of God, be God's mouthpiece, and speak out to mankind. So if somebody comes along claiming to be a prophet and this person promotes any kind of idolatry, any kind of worship of any god other than the one and only God, it was a big problem. And the Lord prescribes basically death for a prophet like that. So just because somebody comes along and says, I speak on behalf of God and I'm a prophet, even if they can predict things correctly, as soon as they promote idolatry or false god worship, that is an automatic cancellation of their prophet status. They are revoked, they are a false prophet, and they are to be stoned. After that, it talks a little bit about, what if family members promote idolatry? What if within your family there are other family members who, for whatever reason, start taking a liking to worshiping these other gods, little g gods, these false gods. And it's a tough word, but it says in the scripture that they must be put to death. That's how serious this thing is to God. He will not share the throne or share the stage or share our hearts with other gods. Right? He loves us too much. He does. And so after we look at what if family members promote idolatry? Then we go on and look at kind of another example. It says, well, what if a whole town promotes idolatry? What if, it's this big outbreak within an entire town, and idolatry is breaking out amongst the Israelites once they settle in the land? And if that's the case, then we are told that pretty much the whole town has got to be taken out. The people have to be killed. The livestock have to be killed. They're to burn basically everything in the town, all of the spoil and plunder that's left over. It's very serious business. After that, we move on to look at some of the clean and unclean foods that God talks about. So we've got permissible and non-permissible things that fall into the category of like land creatures, animals that would be prominent on the land. After that, it looks at permissible and non-permissible water creatures, things that live in the water. After that, it looks at flying creatures, and then after that, it moves on to insects. What is permissible to eat and what is not permissible of each of those different categories, right? From there, it moves on and it talks a little bit about tithes, and it actually tells them that they need to set aside a tenth. I think it's relatively common practice for folks nowadays in the church to tithe 10%. That's kind of become a norm. I don't know how many people do that, but people that do tithe kind of accept that as the norm. This is one place in Scripture where it talked about that. And, in the New Testament, we're told to give out of the abundance that God gives us and to give out of a joyful heart, right? So what we give, it doesn't need to be, grudgingly. Oh, I can't believe I've got to, give this. It needs to be done with joy, with happiness, with a hopeful expectancy to see what God's going to do with those resources through the ministry that we give to, right? It's an exciting thing. And we also read that it says, do not neglect the Levites in your town. Okay? So now remember, we read that once the Israelites go into the promised land, essentially the way that it's going to work is each tribe is going to get their own little allotment of land, and each tribe is going to be providing small cities for various Levites to come live in, so that there will be Levites, aka people of the priesthood, kind of scattered sporadically throughout all of the 12 tribes. And what this is saying is, hey, if there's Levites that are living near you, within your tribal allotment, in towns close to you, if there are Levites, don't neglect them. Take care of them and provide for them, right? And I think that we're called to do the same thing. We as lay people in the church, we're called to not neglect our pastors, the people who are on staff at our places of worship, whether it be a physical building or whether it be a virtual space online, right? It's natural, and it's commanded in the Old Testament, and it talks about it in the New Testament, right? Oftentimes when Paul would be going on his missionary journeys, he did take up a profession. He was a tent maker, but also there were instances where people would help to provide for him, and he would collect donations for the Jews that were needy back in Jerusalem. And it's just kind of a theme, not to neglect the Levite, not to neglect the church, not to neglect not only that, but not to neglect people who are thirsty, people who are hungry, people who are struggling financially, people who are in jail, right? We shouldn't be neglecting any of them. But specifically here in this verse, it talks about, in particular, not neglecting the Levites that are in the town. So that's about all I've got as far as the summary goes. The verse that I wanted to touch on comes out of Psalm 57 of today's reading, and this is just going to be verse number 1. It says, and I believe this is David speaking. He had fled from Saul into a cave when Saul was trying to kill him. If you have never read that story before, we'll get to it as we move through the daily dose, but it's not going to be coming up for a little while still. But anyways, David says, "Have mercy on me, my God, have mercy on me, for in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed." Beloved, are you in the midst of a disaster right now? In one way or another, I think that we could all relate to that. We're all in the midst of COVID, of the coronavirus, of at least a partial lockdown. Most places that I'm familiar with at least have some sort of a partial lockdown going on right now. Life has not returned to normal. And I think that one day it'll return to pretty close to what we remember as being normal. But that being said, even if you don't look at the current coronavirus situation as a disaster, what other disasters are you facing in your life? Are you facing what seems to be a disaster in the form of the loss of a loved one? Are you trying to deal with a marriage that's not going the way that you had hoped it would go when you said those words, "I do"? Has that become your disaster that you're trying to work with? Are you dealing with addiction? Are you struggling with anger? Or are you dealing with persecution that you're facing at work or elsewhere because you're a believer? Friends, like David, I encourage you to take refuge in the shadow of the Lord's wings until whatever disaster you are facing has passed. So I'll leave you guys with that bit of encouragement. I thank you so much for joining me, and we'll do it again tomorrow, right? So until we meet again, my friends, deuces. Love you guys. Take care. Be good.